I'm Anthony.
And I'm Angelica. And together on LDAYS Plugged In, we are giving you the DL on LDs. This podcast is hosted by us, but proudly presented by the Learning Disabilities Association of York-Simcoe.
In this episode, it's all about changes, in particular, ones that are likely to be occurring if you, your child, a student of yours, or someone you know is venturing from grade 8 to high school or high school to post-secondary.
For this episode, Anthony and I are excited to announce that we will be joined by Andrea St, Onge, learning specialist, to respectively discuss how to generate support for anyone going through these transition periods. We believe that their professional insights, coupled with our own experience and the aspect of our LD journeys and vital research we have unsurfaced for your convenience, will make this an exciting, informative, and thought-provoking episode to hear.
Speaking of hearing, don't think that we haven't heard your responses, guys. Special thanks to all those who contributed to our interactive poll on transitions prior to this episode. We can't have these engaging conversations without your feedback and input, and we are very grateful for the opportunity.
We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's get right into it. Someone will adapt when it comes to supporting students in transition during this period of their life is honorable. Guest, Andrea St. Onge.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Andrea is a learning specialist from Xavier College Prep in California. Andrea has 20 years of experience in the education field, working with individuals with LDs. How are you doing, Andrea?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much.
Now, can you briefly describe your background and experience working with individuals with learning disabilities?
Absolutely. So I began my career in education in 2005 or 2004. And I started as a French teacher teaching in Toronto. I then quickly realized that I had students that were struggling and started a Maximize Academic Potential program, which I refer to as MAP after school, helping students with executive functioning, homework assistance, just planning and organizing. And then I've taught a wide variety of courses outside of French, which included study skills. I was in private education up until 2016. And then in 2016, I moved to California to be a learning specialist. And I've been in this role for the last 8 years.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing. So let's get started with transitions to high school.
Of course, when it comes to these two periods of transition, you can't be at the life stage to prepare for post-secondary if you haven't at least started high school. So let's focus on that first.
You can probably still remember your early days at high school. An unfamiliar environment, new faces, older kids, noise, chaos, timetables, and multiple classes and teachers. It's easy to feel lost and overwhelmed, and quite the transition. But before getting ahead of ourselves, what exactly even is a transition?
According to the Ministry of Education, a transition is a journey along the path across momentary gaps and shifts in schools. The pathways are diverse and can be bridged by students, educators, parents, and communities. In contemporary society, they can occur with critical adolescent developmental shifts. Many researchers have found that in general, the shift from elementary school to secondary school is a journey from a relatively less demanding institution to a relatively more demanding one. In the past and in recent times, the Ministry of Education has further elaborated that, in their estimation, transitions for students of this age are often profound with risks because they simultaneously occur in multiple levels that intertwine with their identities. In the more macro levels, this can refer to culture, school structure, and the more smaller levels can refer to families, friends, and classrooms. Support strategies brought up for students that the ministry recommends can include things such as focusing on shifts in parental and peer relations, focusing on roles of counseling, caring, and community outreach, and focusing on the strengths of students and ways of encouragement that can further foster their success. So I guess that's a bit of a food for thought, and I kind of wanted to open up the floor with this. And in particular, I'd be interested in hearing from you, Andrea.
So, in terms of strategies, in my last 20 years of experience, I could tell you that transitioning, especially from 8th to ninth grade, is always a challenge. I think I've noticed that we can put many things into place prior to starting high school, but then sometimes these things sort of fall apart when we're in the reality of things. One of the things that I kind of encourage my students and parents to do is focus on the life skills portion of high school and not so much the academics. I mean, obviously, you can front load information, do summer reading, ways to catch up prior to high school, but I think sometimes just using life skills of learning how to do your laundry once a week or have an organizational day, planning calendars, using different apps and tools to help you stay sort of on track, or ways and sort of discussions parents and students can start having prior to entering high school.
I think that's a really good insight. And that certainly even makes sense, at least speaking for myself in my personal life and just going through it with similar peers at the time. I know it's a little bit in the future while we're discussing, but something that I always thought was strange is sometimes it almost feels like our society, parents are expected to do most of the duties for their child while they're still in high school. And then suddenly, they'll turn 18, especially if they're going to post-secondary and they're living away. They're suddenly expected to pick up everything just like that. And so I think taking advantage of, hey, you have you have 4 years before that happens, before you're at least legally in the eyes of the government an adult. It's okay to introduce things gradually. That makes a lot more sense to me. So I can definitely see why someone with your experience would bring that up. Is just life skills definitely have an importance. It's not just academics and socializing.
Well, you also bring up a very good point, because I think sometimes society, we believe that once you hit that biological 18 years that you're automatically an adult. We've actually learned that cognitively it takes about, on average, 25 years to fully develop a human adult brain. And so I think sometimes we don't always understand that executive function piece is still developing, and that it's going to develop at different rates. And so, just assuming that at 18 you're ready for the real world is not always realistic, and that there are some students that need a little bit more time. And that's why, especially in countries like Canada, Britain, Australia, they offer something called a gap year. When I was in high school in Ontario, we had grade 13. And so it really allowed students, this gap year allows students to kind of go out and either get a job or travel, get those life skills, and then, sort of be ready at 19 to go to college. So I definitely agree with you that, I think we recognize that our kids aren't ready, but we haven't always followed sort of that thinking when it comes to high school and curriculum, but hopefully soon. I'm starting to see things that are being added, like financial literacy and other things that are being added into high school that are great life skills.
I think that's great, because also for myself, I feel like transitioning from your secondary going to post-secondary, you tend to get frightened of like going into college, going into university. Like it's a big deal. It's like the next step of your life that's going to set yourself up for your career. So I feel like it's okay for any child out there to kind of just say, you know what, I'm going to take a year off. Let me explore my options. Let me, maybe go hopefully find, like you said, grade 13, an extra lap or something, or take extra courses or take a general course at a college or university to kind of get the feel of it. Because when I went full force, I didn't take a year off. I was just like, I just want to finish. I just want to finish. And it was a lot. It was overwhelming for myself. So could I have gone back and changed things a little bit differently? Possibly, maybe take a general course and kind of get the feel of what college and university is like. Because for me, in my program that I took, which was architectural technology, it was a lot of hands-on. It was literally like going to work at a firm, architectural firm, and just dealing with the stress heads on. But you know what? It gave me that reality of, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? So, there's different options out there. And I feel like, you should have that opportunity and support your kids in that. Maybe I'm not ready yet, mom and dad. I'm just going to take 1 year. I'm going to go out there, get myself out there in the working field and just figure it out. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to go back.
I totally agree. It's not always a race. And that's where I think the idea that sometimes we have kids that just need extra time with those life skills. I have a lot of students in 11th and 12th grade that still don't have a driver's license. And so those are students that may need a little bit more time at home just to kind of learn some of those independent skills. And that's okay. Sometimes I say, why are we rushing? Who's racing you? If it's going to take you a little bit longer and you're going to be more successful in a post-secondary institution because you had the time to really focus on those skills, and that's what's going to set you up for success, then you really have to follow your own pace. And the same thing sort of applies in high school too, because kids learn at different rates. And so parents need to be mindful of what their children are actually capable of, and then find ways to kind of help them support, what they need to do.
Yeah, certainly good to hear, Andrew. That definitely sounds insightful. Now, I also, since obviously this is a podcast kind of focused towards people with learning disabilities and trying to broaden the support and community for people with learning disabilities, I have to ask, that would also include you as well, if I'm correct.
Yes. So I have ADHD. I was diagnosed a little bit in life, but definitely my parents sent me for educational testing in 11th grade. But unfortunately, it was DSM-3, and I did not fit the criteria at that point. And especially being a female in the 90s, we didn't have a lot of information about how ADHD presents in women. So I was initially diagnosed, like many women in sort of my age group, with generalized anxiety disorder and depression, and then realized that the medications and those types of things weren't necessarily working. But I did find a lot of success in cognitive behavioral therapy, and I also now use proper medication management to help support my ADHD, and it's something that I live with every day, and I've kind of turned it into part of, essentially my career. So this is something that means a lot to me personally and not just professionally as well.
Yeah, and that clearly comes about when you're speaking with us. We can easily get that from you and ascertain it. Thinking back to your high school years, however, if you don't mind me venturing into a bit of personal territory here,
Sure.
I know obviously you weren't aware of it at the time, and the diagnosis wasn't there, since you did say that the assessments were in grade 11. But with the benefit of hindsight, if you could think back to those earlier years in high school, is there anything that maybe stood out to you in terms of transitioning into high school that maybe kind of stemmed from your diagnosis, or maybe certain characteristics?
Absolutely. Looking back kind of on where I struggled, it was definitely in the organization. When I went to college, I thought I had everything covered. I was told, like, you've made it, you're an adult now, get out in the real world. And that was a massive struggle. So after my first year of college, I attended the University of Western Ontario, and I got put on academic probation. I was beside myself. I had never had a detention or any sort of, believe it or not, disciplinary action prior to that. And so the word probation just really scared me. And so I then entered into the student support center, and I met this incredible woman named Colleen, who was like an executive functioning coach. And she told me to bring all my syllabuses. And, we had back then like paper calendars, and that was my biggest issue, was not learning the content, but I couldn't figure out when my midterms were, and things that were labs and stuff that were sort of outside of class time, and just sort of organizing my life in terms of how to study. And so she really sort of modeled that behavior. And then over time, I would practice with her support and then mastered it on my own. And so I think that's why I'm in the role that I am, because I still struggle with this. This is something I have to. And so if I can share my story with others, it can empower other people, but also know that I've got some tips and tricks that may be beneficial to other people. So I would say that was a little bit of like a false sense of security going to college, that I had everything together. And then it fell apart, and I'm really blessed that I was not discouraged. I think a lot of people end up dropping out, but I kind of stuck with it. But I also was open to help. And I think I realized that, if I don't get the help, then I'm not going to meet my goals. And so I was willing to sort of surrender and sort of accept that support and help. And it also kind of then started into therapy. And those are always things that are really great to have if you can find those resources. Just an outside person that you can bounce ideas off of, or can give you a different perspective that's not in your current circle, is always something that's helpful and positive. So yes, it's interesting, but I think I had that motivation that I wanted to get a degree. And I think that's what helped. And with ADHD in particular, if you are highly intrinsically motivated, that can be your superpower. So I think once I started figuring out the whole academic thing, I graduated with undergrad, and it actually inspired me to continue with a master's degree. I barely thought I was going to graduate high school, literally.
And that's a great story. And that's very inspirational because at that time when I was in school, I didn't have that. Who do I look up to, right? Who do I look up to? Who's done what? I know you see it more now, like celebrities who have all sorts of learning disabilities and ADHD. And to me, that's not enough. I need to hear from the real people who powered through school, who work extremely hard, and manage to create this life that they live and they enjoy what they love. So that's very inspirational, and I thank you so much for sharing that because I relate to you a lot where you're trying to figure out like am I going to finish high school? Am I going to become what I want to become? Am I going to be able to be that successful person that's going to provide in the future and live this life? So it's really hard for any student out there that's going into these transitions and trying to figure out like, oh, what am I going to do? Really, that's the biggest question that we carry throughout our whole years.
Absolutely.
Yeah, certainly. And I also really like what you said, Andrea, about uh, not being afraid to ask for help and just communicating with people in general. And since now I think I'm not the only one in this group right now that's probably thinking back to those years vividly. I guess in hindsight, if there's something that I wish I can address because I'm still, to be completely honest with you, dealing with it right now, is I wish I talked with my parents more. And I would recommend any student in that situation to talk with their parents more. I know in every generation there's going to be strife between the adolescent and the parent, and that's not what I'm proposing. That's not going to be the case at all. Just for me personally. So at the time, my dad had a business arrangement that basically expanded twofold. He operates a business with my uncle, and this ventured into another location. So while he was very proud that he achieved that stage in his career, it meant he was away from home a lot. And my mom, as she works as well, meant that she was away from home a lot too. And I carried with me this sense of I have to be as perfect as possible in high school. Look at the life that my parents are trying to carve for me. But I didn't really express that to them, and they didn't really express things to me because our schedules were kind of limited. And when I look back on it now, I think later down the line, my parents expressed that they kind of feel that maybe I didn't feel as comfortable with them compared to other kids, or that I didn't appreciate them. And that's not the case at all. And there's been, quite a few years we spent kind of picking up the pieces where we left off. And I say this with no ill will towards my parents. If anything, I understand it completely more now. It was one of those things that, oh, wow, that was unintentional, but I still wish that it was left unsaid. Uh, I still wish that it was left said. And maybe for anyone who's in that current situation, you can talk with your parents, even if it's a little bit. Trust me, they'll appreciate it. It'll go a long way.
And I would agree. I think that especially with any sort of neurodevelopmental disability, we're realizing that the genetics play a big sort of key. So when I was diagnosed with ADHD in my mid 30s, this actually strengthened my relationship with my father because I realized that I'm very much genetically aligned to him. And so then at 77, he then received an ADHD diagnosis. And so this really allowed us to talk about certain behaviors. Like we were both nail biters. I just thought, dad does it, so do I. We didn't really see that connection. And then we started looking at Grandma Fran, and then, dad started remembering about his grandfather. And so we sort of looked at, okay, so it goes from, daughter to father, father, mother, mother, father again, and just in sort of our genealogy. And so it kind of bonded us in the sense that I started to understand that these are not character defects, right? So if I forget something, or if I accidentally tell you a lie because I thought I left my keys in my purse, but they're really in the living room, that it's not an intentional thing and that I'm not deliberately blowing you off or lying to you about something. I just really can't remember where they are. And my latest memory is them being in my purse. So we now sort of understand each other, that it's, my poor mom's, because we're like, it's not selective hearing or it's my ADHD. I think she's getting a little sick of it, but I think she also understands that some of our behaviors are not intentional and that they just come from disorganization, or, if we haven't slept enough or eaten enough, like those are things that also can have an impact on our ability to sort of lock in on things or accomplish tasks. So I think it's really bonded my relationship with my father. And so now when I have challenges, we can kind of talk and share different ways of how we've dealt with things. Or if I have a bad day and I said something I shouldn't have said, and, my dad's like, oh, this happened to me, and he'll share stories. And so now it kind of feels like that parental support, even though I'm in my 40s now, it's been nice to still sort of share some of the difficulties that we've struggled with in our lives and be able to kind of seek some comfort in one another.
I think goes to show too that, again, for anyone listening, both ourselves and our parents, everyone's going through this life at the same number of times, as in once, right? And there's always time to learn new things and to grow. So I guess getting back to what we were saying earlier about how there's almost this notion you have to know everything about yourself, and as an adult at 18, well, as we've learned so far, that not only is there evidence of, frankly, more action with the brain many years afterwards, but, the fact you can be diagnosed much later in life, such as at 77 years old, goes to show you that things are always changing. There's a lot more concepts to learn, and a lot of new information to take in. And that's, I think, what makes life fascinating.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. How has your diagnosis impacted your ability to adapt to new routines during transitions?
So I think what I've learned is when I am moving, obviously I moved from Toronto, Canada to California. So that was a big life transition, or any sort of transition with work or new living arrangements. I find those things to be a little bit more complicated. I'm sort of a creature of habit, and so I form routines. So what I try to do is sort of create a list of what is my new routine going to look like as I'm transitioning into sort of this new place. And so I think about sort of kind of creating a list of things that I'm going to have to now consider that I may not have considered before. And I try to just sort of slowly chip away at things, because if I try to do too many things at once, then I'll get frustrated and then try to start again. And, the term spinning your wheels sort of comes into play. I think for me, in terms of like life work balance, like I make sure that by the end of the day, I get all the work that I need to get done. Don't bring work home, because that backpack just stays in the car, doesn't come out. I make sure that I get laundry and personal items taken care of on Sunday so that I can start the week sort of planning ahead. So when I have something new, I try to find ways to incorporate what I need to get done into things that are already established and not try to reinvent the wheel. But transition is very difficult because we are sort of, I think I'm more of a creature of habit. And so once I build sort of my own routine, it is hard at times to then change that mindset or start remembering that you have this new routine and to keep following it. And I think also the key is not to create too many items, because that will create being overwhelmed. So start small. So I'll pick one or two things that I really need to focus on. And then sort of once I'm set with that, then I'll start to think about smaller items that need to be included into my schedule.
I completely understand. I go through the same thing myself when it comes to that work-life balance. Also being able to prioritize certain tasks and, just come up with a schedule. For me, it's all about the sticky notes, color coordination. When I'm at work, I got sticky notes, I got a list to do. And it's true, when you've got so much on that list, it really, really becomes overwhelming. And you're just like, I'm not doing anything today, so I'll figure out how to catch up on the next day.
Yeah. I don't know why we have this mindset of if we're overwhelmed, we don't want to do things, but then they seem to pile up and that becomes even more overwhelming. So sometimes it's good. I use the chipping away factor. So sometimes you just want to, take one item and just sort of chip away at that and not look at the entire list, because it can be very overwhelming.
So when I look back on my high school years, a common thing that I noticed with friends at the time was there would be a lot of jokes about staying up all night to complete assignments, maybe working on something the day before. And I'm really proud of the fact that, frankly, I never resorted to that. I knew that I wouldn't be able to do an entire assignment in one night, and I actually think that saved me a lot of stressful nights. And I actually never worked on schoolwork past probably 8:30 to 9 o'clock unless I worked right after school. And because to me, I knew I don't function well late at night, and very, very rarely, if that meant handing in an assignment partially late, I was cognizant of the consequences. I was accepting of that. And I think it was a lot less stressful.
I would agree with that.
Andrea, I guess for one question to wrap this portion of the podcast up is since we've gone over how things can happen on an individual level and even in terms of among peers, what role would you say, based on your professional experience, that the school plays in fostering effective transitions for students?
So I think that schools play a huge part in helping students to transition. I think that there's a big gap in terms of student expectations that can happen between 8th and 9th grade. As a teacher who taught 8th and 9th grade, I can tell you that when you're in high school, there's a lot more privilege and sort of more independence. And so students, although they have this newfound freedom, sort of need boundaries and guidelines. I also think that what's awesome about our curriculum in the province of Ontario is that they use metacognition in teaching. So that's thinking about learning or understanding your learning. And I know that Ontario is now rolling out a financial literacy test, which I think is great for students to understand financial credit cards, mortgages, and how our economy sort of works in terms of interest rates going up and down and what that means if you own a property or if you're investing your money into things like that. So I think that the schools are starting to see that there's a need for things outside of curriculum, outside of math curriculum, for example. And so they're helping students to make those transitions. But I think that having students understand their learning or understand why they are not meeting certain marks or benchmarks is a great way to help them transition. You're going to have students that are going to forget their homework. It's going to be in their backpack. And so you might want to have after school programs or executive functioning programs that give students tutoring in executive function and not always tutoring in math and English and science. Right? Those are things that we're starting to see, like ADHD coaches and things like that. So I think that the schools do sort of have a responsibility to sort of help their students to be successful, understand how they're learning, understand where their gaps are. I mean, we've just been through a pandemic, so we talk a lot about that, and find ways to help give them real life skills when they're in the classroom, if applicable.
That's a great answer.
Now let's get into transitioning into post-secondary. All right, everyone. So let's say high school is going good. And then before you know it, it is time for graduation robes. And then everyone goes on their ways with a significant portion going into post-secondary. Let's discuss common challenges and effective supports for this life change, for this life stage and transition period. In preparing for this episode, we found a great resource by the Learning Disabilities Association of Ontario, or LDAOs, where researchers assert that successful transition for all students, including those who have learning disabilities, is based on the students identify needs and the students recognize strengths, skills, and competencies, the students' interests, the students' preferences, the students' short and long-term goals, the students' past experiences, including academic achievements, co-curricular and volunteer involvements at school and in the community. The paper goes on to indicate that the students with learning disabilities have an average to above average intelligence, and provided that they have been taught, supported, and accommodated throughout their educational career appropriately, they should be able to be successful in the post-secondary destination of their choice. While most of them can handle the demands of post-secondary education, they should be encouraged to make independent and appropriate choices, to be supported through appropriate transition planning to achieve their personal goals. Support strategies recommended in the paper are for the local school boards to see if secondary schools can offer learning strategies credit courses to all students with learning disabilities, which focuses on the student's understanding of his or her own learning disabilities, appropriate learning strategies and accommodations, the impact of learning disabilities on the various aspects of the student's life, including the issues of social competence and independent living, self-advocacy training, academic and career counseling, technology and its importance of current and future success of students with learning disabilities. So these are some great strategies to look into, but also I want to share a little bit of my transition from high school to post-secondary. So my dream was to become an architect, and I didn't have the grades to get into a university. So I went to the college route, which was architectural technology. And I realized, you're excited, you're starting college, I'm ready. It's a whole new environment, a whole change, a whole transition. It's everything. And all of a sudden, I find out that at the time, there wasn't a support for me during the post-secondary education system at that time. I'm talking about 2000 and 2000 and I think 8 it was when I first started. So I kind of jumped from high school into college, and it was like, wow, am I going to be able to do this? It was an overwhelming schedule. I was put in English as a second language class, and it wasn't what I thought it would be like in order to help me with my learning disability or give me accommodations. And I felt like I had to advocate for myself. I had to make these decisions in order to help myself further into what is coming to me in the next 3 years of post-secondary education. It was tough. You go into the department that helps with your schedule, and I was just feeling so overwhelmed, full of anxiety, and I was just like, what the heck am I doing? Where is the help? I thought they, received my IEP. I thought they received all this information. I went into that English class, and it was just literally English for international students. I removed myself from that class, went into regular English, and there was no combinations. Again, this was back in 2008. I'm not sure how things are now, but this was my experience. And I'm not going to lie, it was pretty scary. And I just didn't know how was I going to survive the next 3 years of college.
To chime in, I see this a lot. One of the things that I do in my role is, so I receive students for 4 years from 9th through 12. So I help them transition from 8th through 9th, but then I also need to sort of prep them to go into post-secondary. And so once you get into college, you are now 18. So in the United States of America, you have HIPAA protection, and I'm sure privacy laws exist in Canada, where if you are 18 years old, your parents no longer have the right to advocate or learn information about you without consent. And so it's interesting because I have some students who kind of want to start college with a clean slate and think, oh, like I used accommodations and I use these strategies, like I'm fine. And one of the things we talk about is that that's really great, but if things are not fine, then what tools are you going to use? So one of the things I do is I have a little class with my seniors at sort of right before their final exams, where we talk about how do we locate student disability services on each campus? What are the services that they're provided? How do you reach out? How do you get accommodations? What medical documentation do you need? How do you find the requirements for that medical documentation? And so we start talking about what am I going to do this summer, even though I'm out of high school technically, but I haven't officially started college. What am I going to do that summer besides obviously get a job and try to earn some money? But what are some other things that I can do to prep for that? And I think, meeting with your teachers in advance. So one of the accommodations they have in the United States is that you can get pre-registration. So that allows you to make sure that you're getting into the classes that you need to. And then it gives you enough time to reach out to professors, disclose your disability, explain to them how you learn and what you need, and then find out from your professors what are other resources such as TA assistance or other labs, or maybe another even class that you can audit if you need to in order to get sort of ahead. So there's a lot of information and resources, but the hard part is that you have to seek them out. I think sometimes in high school, students rely on their counselors or special education teachers or even homeroom teachers, classroom teachers to identify these things. And, you're going to extra help or go see this teacher, and, we're micromanaging their schedules. And then they get to college and it's like, there's no one telling them that they're failing or no one telling them to go to office hours. And so those are things that we can encourage our students to do before they go to post-secondary. Office hours are very important because if you, especially someone like me who didn't have an ADHD diagnosis, I probably zoned out half my lecture and needed to go back to fill in the spots where I wasn't paying attention, especially when you're in a 3-hour lecture. There's a lot of information.
I totally agree. A lot of information, and you're just trying to navigate through it. And I remember having, I think it was 8 courses, and it was 44 hours a week crammed into Monday to Friday. It could either be from 8 a.m. all the way till 5. It was just a lot. Like, I'm learning history of architecture. I'm learning concrete. I'm looking at building science. And then I've got HVAC, electrical, plumbing. And it's just like, why is this happening in one semester?
Right. And now you're living on campus, probably for the first time independently. You also need to feed yourself and clothe yourself. So not only are you looking at what do I need to do academically, but at some point you need to buy groceries, probably prep them in some sort of way, and then need acceptable clothes to go to school. So that was one thing that I definitely struggled. My laundry pile was getting really high. And it was a time management issue. It wasn't that I didn't know how to use a washer or dryer. It was, how am I going to fit this into my busy schedule? When I wanted to do laundry, that was a time where, I didn't give myself enough time. I had to make it to class. So then obviously it's going to sit for a few more days.
That reminds me of my time in post-secondary, especially in the beginning, and certainly going through similar troubles. One thing that I would recommend is the responsibility does totally fall on you, but that doesn't mean that you have to go at it entirely alone. And in my experience, especially back then, I found peer groups to be very effective. Now, for those listening that are from the GTA in particular in Ontario, I would recommend you look at the LDAYS page. There are quite a bit of different peer groups available. For those listening elsewhere, such as in California, I would recommend you check your local directories, because I guarantee you that there are some peer groups. And just like how a rising tide lifts all boats, it can be a way for you to both meet new people and hopefully become familiar with them. And it's also people who share your struggles. So let's say, hypothetically, Andrea, let's say you still had that laundry piling up. And I said, Andrea, maybe it'd be good to make a schedule for that. I would hope that you wouldn't take it as personally, because it's coming from someone like me who shares the same diagnosis, who also is definitely guilty about having the quite high laundry pile and knows it's coming from a place of support rather than criticism. And then you could tell me, hey, Anthony, maybe there's a more effective way to do dishes rather than them just holding up in the sink for large amounts of time. And we can both keep each other accountable, right? So, I think that the effectiveness of peer groups, especially when you're transitioning into post-secondary, and especially if you're going to live off campus, cannot go understated.
Well, it's interesting, Anthony, that you mentioned that, because Stanford launched a program called Accountability Partners for Student Athletes. So they realized that a lot of student athletes at Stanford have a very vigorous schedule. They have all kinds of training and practice games. And so they started an accountability program where you are matched up with a peer. And basically, like you said, Anthony, you hold each other accountable. So they would match me up with someone who's got the, like you, who may have the laundry pile just as high as me. And we're going to tackle it together, but we're going to hold each other accountable. And then it's easier because, like you said, Anthony, we're both struggling with the same thing. So instead of it being like, oh, we're judging each other, we're actually empowering each other to get things done. And there is something about, you don't want to disappoint someone else or being left behind. So like your friend, like Anthony, if I saw you put that laundry pile away, that may motivate me to be like, oh, I don't want to fail, and he's winning, or if he can do it, I can do it. Right. So it's that accountability partnership. So I think that if you can, one of the things I had available to me in college was I was in social science major. And so people I was in a residence that had all social science students. And so a lot of us took the same classes, and we would kind of walk together, and especially in the beginning of the school year. And that was really nice to be with students who shared a similar schedule to me. And I think I intrinsically learned things just by kind of hanging out with them. They would talk about, when are you going to study? And I'm like, yeah, when am I going to study? Maybe I should, study when she studies, or join a study group, or meet at the library. And so I think that peer group can be very beneficial and kind of like a support group at the end of the day, where you're learning and working together.
I really like that suggestion about the peer group. And I know it's really hard for a lot of us, because even going into college, and the biggest thing is making new friends to begin with, and being able to allow yourself to take on that challenge and meet new people, which is, and it's not like high school where you're dealing with the same age group. Now you've got people that's from your age group all the way to 70. I had a man in my class who was almost 72 taking architecture. So it's a different dynamic, and it's a maturity that you're going to be able to develop for yourself. And it does take time, and don't rush into things. If you find that one friend, you'll be surprised you're going to be introduced to 4 new friends, because they're in different classes, but you may have that one class in common. So it does take a little bit of time, and don't force it, and allow yourself to just, whenever you're ready, just, hey, you know what? I'm Angelica. Nice to meet you. We have the same class. Great. What other classes do we have that are the same? So it's definitely, I love that idea. And I wish I had that, because I'm just like, I was still shy. I was still nervous. I was kind of like to myself, like, where do I go from here? Like now you're dealing with adults, like from all ranges of ages. And if you're not living on campus, you're kind of thinking of, okay, I have to take the train. I have to figure out the next subway. Am I going to drive to work? Where am I going to park where I'm not going to get 10 million tickets like I used to get? Because you're just like trying to rush down to downtown and get back to Vaughan in a certain amount of time so you can go to work after. So, there's a lot happening. And I feel like post secondary really kind of helps you. Well, I can say in my experience, it really has helped me how to really navigate the reality of life when it comes to your career.
That certainly makes a lot of sense, Angelica. It can definitely feel when you're at that stage of your life and when you're starting new and post secondary, especially at the age which people typically go in, so 18, 19, 20, and what have you, it can feel like when things are crumbling, it can feel like everything is crumbling so fast. And it's important to just keep that headspace. And I have to say, other than seeking out support strategies, one of the great ways that we learn that, the sky is not falling every time something goes awry is through life experience. And who has a lot of life experience typically? Parents. And why we're grateful for every single parent that responded to our interactive poll recently that we wanted to share with everybody. So, on the question, how can parents help foster confidence in their children during these life stages? We received answers such as communication. As we've talked about before, can include having an open line of communication, being positive with your words. There's also preparing, so helping to get their child into a routine, setting reminders, and giving them a schedule. Andrea, what advice would you give to parents with children who are preparing for upcoming transitions into post-secondary?
I think with sometimes parents focus on the things that we didn't get right instead of the things that we did. So for example, if your child is struggling with remembering their gym bag or remembering their homework and they did it 3 times that week, we won't really say anything, but then the one day they forgot their homework, then it's like, how did you not remember? You need to be more organized, but we never took into consideration the days that they did get it right. So I think it could also be sort of like a mindset of understanding that your children are still children, that they are going to make mistakes just like adults do, but to have sort of reminders posted on the back of doors. There's a new rap that Adam Sandler made called Wallet Phone Keys, or Cell Phone Wallet Keys, right? So that I sing that rap every time I leave the house, right? Remembering my cell phone, my wallet, and my keys. Those are the 3 things that I need every day. So there are ways that you can help your child and make it sort of modeling behaviors, or, okay, it's Sunday, so what are we doing this week? Family calendars, if there's a way that you can share a family calendar so everyone knows what the schedule is, and helpful reminders. Even though your child's going to remember, it's always nice to say, oh, hey, don't forget your lunch bag. But also set your child up to have something prepared to remember their lunch bag if, on the off chance you didn't remind them yourself, right? So I think it's sort of the mindset of your child wants to succeed. They want to come home. They want attaboys and attagirls, and they want to make you proud. And so I think sometimes just kind of looking at the times they get things right really empower them, so that when they feel, that discontent of having disappointed someone or forgot something, like they're lecturing themselves, right? They feel bad. So it kind of alleviates a little bit of that pressure because they got it right, and it's not always focused on every time they forget or every time they've done something wrong. So that'd be my biggest advice to parents is focus on the positive.
For sure. I can attest to that because my parents really had to adjust to the way I think and the way I do things, and to really, get them to understand, like, this is how I work. This is how my daughter is. I can't put too much pressure. As I mentioned in last month's episode, it was my mom, who is a university scholar, and then my dad, who's just a dropout from the very young age of grade 2. And culturally, in the Spanish culture, ideally you come to a different country to provide this life for your children. Yes, you work the job that you don't like, but it's given you that opportunity for your child to learn, and you don't want them to fall into your footsteps. You want them to do better. So I feel like my parents really had to adapt and adjust and say, whatever you choose to do, just do it. There was no pressure. It literally took that weight off my shoulders, and I felt at ease in order to do anything I wanted to do in life. And even till this day, at the age that I'm at If I tell them I'm going to start something, like I'm going to write a book, if I tell them tomorrow, they're going to be like, do it. Go ahead and do it, because they know I have the capabilities. They know that they believe in me, and everything that I've done in my life, they've always been my support system. So I 100%, I love what you shared about what parents should do to support their kids.
I think that's really cool, Angelica. I would also like to add to it too that I think maybe looking at this from a parent's perspective, it's important to remember too that you're the one with a different amount of life experience. There is often obviously a generational divide between you and your child. And what I don't mean by that is focus on the differences. I mean just sometimes acknowledging that can go a long way. When I look back on this time in my life, going into, well, I should explain this first. So a few years before transitioning to post-secondary, I was coming back from an event with my father, and he suddenly turned to me and he said, "What do you think about grandfather?" And I looked at him about my grandfather, so his dad, and I looked at him confused, and I said, "I love him and I like visiting him." And I said, "Why did you ask me that?" And he said, "Well, when I was growing up, I really respected and I loved your grandfather, but I was afraid to talk about a lot of things with him. And I don't want us to have that relationship." And at the time, I kind of said, "Okay, Dad, no problem." And I didn't understand how deep that was for him to be able to express that. And now that I've gotten older, I definitely get it. And we've worked on that. But my point is, in hindsight, as the parent, I understand it took a lot of courage for my dad to express, don't get me wrong. But I guess if I had to be in his position, I would maybe say, "Hey, this is kind of, you're going to get older and our relationship is going to change. And that's natural. And it happened with me and my parents. But this is how I'd like to keep some form of communication with you. For example, if you feel this, you can always come to me and we can talk." And I just think, especially during a period of transition like this, that can be a really effective thing to bring about in a child from a parent's perspective.
I totally agree. I think that the other thing that's helpful when you have that relationship with your parents, something that my dad and I have sort of bonded over, I've kind of mentioned before, a lot of times if I was scared to tell him something, I realized very quickly that he most likely had a similar situation and that a lot of the things I was experiencing he did too. And so it took away that judgment from the parent, and it helped me realize in him too that, again, it's not a character defect, it's a struggle, and that we're here to support each other. And were times where I felt my dad could empathize a little bit more than my mother could. And so that also bonded because he obviously didn't realize it at the time, but had similar struggles. And instead of getting mad at me for it, he understood it and then had that conversation with me. And it kind of created this little bond that we had. And, I definitely agree. I grew up in an era where I hid my mental health disabilities from my parents and sought resources behind their back. And then meanwhile, they would have loved to have known and been part of that journey. And when they found out, they were obviously upset I didn't share it with them, but understood and have been my biggest advocates and cheerleaders ever since. And my mom sends me ADHD stuff all the time. And, she obviously now understands certain things. She doesn't harp on me as much anymore. And she uses the term, which I love, "can I make a suggestion?" Goes a lot farther with me than telling me what to do, because that's not going to work. So I definitely can agree with you, Anthony, that establishing sort of a relationship, where you feel that you've got that open communication and can talk about things that may be uncomfortable is something that's really important.
Thank you for that. And again, with this whole topic of transition, other things to consider and to discuss: preparation, transition plans, understanding your child's strengths and challenges, encourage communication, promote independence, acknowledge progress. And I feel like it just comes in hand when it comes to that child and parent relationship, and work together, talk about it, try to have that open conversation about this, because I had to rely on my parents to tell me, don't stop, keep going. Yes, you can do it. And once you establish that and being able to accept that your child has these amazing skills and strengths, it's going to help them just to grow and achieve what they want to achieve. And they will become successful. You just got to let them ride out the train until it stops and they say, "You know what? I did it."
Absolutely.
And that marks another episode in the books. We want to humbly thank our guest of honor, Andrea, for discussing aspects of 2 transition periods today. We also want to thank those who participated in our poll. And of course, thank you to all of you who tuned in into this episode of LDAYS Plugged In.
Friendly reminder that our episodes will be released every second Thursday of every month. Stay tuned for our next episode where we will give you the DL on LDs and navigating your IEP and how to ask for support.